Hello everyone. So, gotta get the volume first. So forgive me for kind of triple dipping here, but those last couple videos that I posted, I just recorded in a batch, so I didn't really see much response or what people were discussing about it. And I'm not trying to really continue any, well, not argument is not the right word, but I think that I have said a pretty thorough kind of thing of what I was trying to say, but I figured I may as well do something else, not so much ranty, but more so informative, because I do continue to see some, oh my god, KJR is in this pug scrim, this is awesome. I do still see a little bit of misconceptions regarding class limits and whitelist and whatnot. Again, kind of this misconception that it is that these decisions are made to uphold the, 2 scout, 2 soldier, demo medic meta, which is not the case. And I figured I'd just give some concrete examples, talk about class limits specifically, and why they exist. Because, the different limits for different classes have different reasons for existing. And some are, what's the word I'm looking for? Some are just arbitrary, right? Admittedly is the word I was looking for. Some are admittedly arbitrary. So let's talk about it. For starters, the baseline arbitrary decision is class limit 2 being just kind of the default, right? So class limit 2 is on, I can't look at the classes right now. Class limit 2 is for Scout, Soldier, Pyro, and Spy, I think, are Scout, Soldier, Pyro, Spy. Yeah, the 4 classes with class limit 2. And the fact that that's class limit 2 is pretty arbitrary. Now, that being said, if you were allowed to have 3 Pyros or 3 Spies, would you be seeing more Pyros or Spies? No, you wouldn't. You would still be seeing them the same amount. I mean, there's class limit 2 on both of those classes. Sometimes you do see double Spy as like a really high risk, high reward. One spy gets discovered and then they think that there isn't a spy, but there actually still is kind of play. And there's actually a really funny clip from a recent invite season where a team did try and play double spy into last, and then both spies got discovered and like set on fire on the exact same time, and they both just fed, and then they lost the point or something, which was very funny. But yeah, you wouldn't be seeing more of these classes if they were allowed to have 3 of them. You don't see more than 1 typically, even though there are 2 allowed. That being said, in the case of Scout and Soldier, yeah, you might be seeing 3 Scouts, 1 Soldier, or potential like 3 Soldiers on a mid-fight or something like that for a triple bomb. So again, these class limits in the case of Scout and Soldier, that limit of 2 does exist more so than anything to restrict Scout and Soldier. It's just kind of applied broadly to all the classes. So yeah, that is a bit arbitrary, deciding that 2 Scouts and 2 Soldiers are the limit and you can't be running more, which, yeah, you can have your own opinions about that or what have you, but yeah, that's kind of the arbitrary class limit 2 that we have to deal with. Now, not all classes are class limit 2. In fact, most of them are restricted to 1 at a time, and those examples being Sniper, Engineer and Heavy, and Medic and Demo. And I split those into 3 separate categories because they all have unique reasons for that. And actually, Medic should be its own category. So let's begin with the case of Medic. And this is, like, Medic class restriction 1 is something that I went into more depth in on my how to make a metagame video, which in retrospect, I just feel like I could have done such a better job articulating myself during that. But point being, basically the entire game revolves around Ubers. And this does not apply, or not apply. This is not unique to 6s. Oh, is this a pug? I say we're banning Cloak and Dagger in these pugs. I'm assuming that we know they have a spy and they're not doing anything because they have a spy or something. I don't know. Whatever. So, what was I saying? That's actually kind of ironic that I'm jokingly talking about banning something in this pug of all things. So what were we talking about? We were talking about medic being restricted to 1. Yeah, basically the entire game revolves around Ubers, and this applies to every competitive format. Every competitive format has 1 medic. I suppose no restriction 6s does technically count as a format, but yeah, 1 medic means that there's only 1 Uber, meaning that if you, for example, force or drop the enemy team, then you know that they don't have an Uber, right? And then in, for example, a stalemate, you can then play around that fact and intentionally sack players, like sacrifice them. Typically soldiers, because they can bomb and, you know, be effective in that sense. You sack those players in order to try and get that force or that drop. And then now you have Uber add because your medic survived. Their medic used or dropped their Uber, so they don't have it anymore. And you can use the fact that your team can become invincible at the press of a button and theirs can't to take space, because if they don't respect that and try and hold the doors like normal, then you just use your Uber and kill them all and then push in anyway. And if they play passively in order to not die to your Uber, then doors are a lot easier to get through and you can take space, get the point, etc. So you can just see at a baseline level how restricting medic to 1 creates this really interesting dynamic where it gives something concrete for strategy to form around. Now, if we imagine you can have 2 medics, then suddenly that is no longer an option. In a stalemate, you can't just force their medic and push. There are 2 Ubers to get past, and whether a medic drops or forces or doesn't stops to matter as much, like very, very quickly, like logarithmically quickly, I suppose. Because the asset of an Uber is what matters. It's not necessarily how many Ubers. And yeah, things would quickly fall apart if you were allowed to have multiple medics. So that is, again, an arbitrary decision. You could probably play a format with multiple medics, and you could probably develop a metagame for it. But I think it would be way, way less interesting and way more shallow than what we have in 6s, or Highlander or Prolander for that effect. Again, basically every format that people play, with the exception of no restriction 6s, has medic class limit 1, because the push and pull of Uber play is such a fun concept to play around and gives a core backbone for the game. So yeah, medic is a really unique case in that regard, because Uber is just such a broken mechanic and such a centralizing mechanic that limiting it to 1 is not necessarily so much intended to, you know, reduce the brokenness or whatever, because like 2 Ubers is too powerful or whatever, but more so that now there's very clear play and counterplay with regards to Ubers, because you know what you can expect, and you know that if you force an enemy Uber, they don't have an Uber to use, right? So that's why medic class limit 1 exists. As far as demo goes, class limit 1 on demo is, again, to prevent more people from running demo, because stickies are really broken. So in the case of, well, let's look at how the current meta unfolds, really. So when it comes to holding a point defensively in a stalemate or whatever, demo holds a door, traps that door, and a lot of the time you will play a demo that's kind of central and playing to rotate to where the enemy combo is trying to pressure, because demo is the best door holding asset that a team has. You want those stickies to be applied to wherever the enemy team's trying to pressure, so that they can't take space, they can't really pressure effectively, and if they do send a sack, then the sack is going to be really ineffective because it's not associated with any pressure. The bomb should just get eaten by scouts. So that gives an idea of counterplay for the aggressors, right? Because you can be, you know, spamming the demo off the door, in which case then you can potentially get through or do whatever, or B, you can rotate doors to where the demo is not. And we could even use the map we're on right now as an example of Gully Wash. On second, it's not uncommon. In fact, at this point in the meta, it might actually be typical, which again, another example of kind of the ever-shifting state of 6s. It's pretty common now for a demo to hold big door by default, just because one big play, I guess, or strategy that a team would have as far as pressuring into second goes in an even Uber's stalemate would be to get a guy behind through baby door. And a demo can trap that up. A demo can watch big door effectively. So oftentimes you have a demo watching big door. Now, this isn't always the case, but a lot of the time a team's default plan will be to go pressure wherever the demo is not, and a demo has to decide whether he wants to rotate or not, because the rotate between choke and big door can be kind of far sometimes. So yeah, that's kind of how teams tend to play Gully Wash. And a common strat is to, you know, pressure big door, make sure the demo is there, in fact. Oh my god, I'm just getting chain stabbed. And like, how can you look at that and be like that spy got a 3K, man? Do you need this to be a full-time class for that to be, like, look at how everyone's excited and whatnot. Whatever, I'm getting on my soapbox again. No, so, yeah, for demo. Into Gully Wash second, it's not an uncommon plan to pressure big door, make sure the demo is there, you know, pressure that as if you're trying to get a guy behind, and then instead sending a couple people through choke to try and bust choke, because, you know, they don't have that strong defensive utility there. And a lot of the time, you are pressuring big door in order to have the heals rotate over as well. So you know the medics over there, you know the players holding choke are not getting supported by a medic and are thus easier to pressure as a result. And again, another example of, you know, medic class restriction 1 allows you to do these things, because then you know that, you know, the medic can only be in one place at a time. But either way. Now, we imagine 2 demos, suddenly that all that interesting counterplay, all that decision-making, all those options that you have as a team don't exist anymore, because now both doors are trapped, both doors have a demo, and your only option is to kind of just headbutt your way through a demo holding a choke point, which is a notoriously difficult thing to do, and then you just choose of where you want to do that. So again, another example of, in the case of demo being class restriction, it is A, to prevent more demos from being run full time, like in the case of medic, and B, to actually give teams more options, not less. By adding these restrictions, you are making the meta more interesting and more dynamic, with more options for play and counterplay rather than less. Because if you're allowed to have 2 demos, everyone would use 2 demos, and the game would not only be a lot slower. I remember what happened here. My soldier was just raging at me. Well, not raging. He was being very dismissive in the way that he typically does as a player, and I just got mad and decided to go feed to punish him, but I ended up living for some reason. Whatever. So, yeah, you're creating more options in these restrictions in the case of demo and medic. And those are the 2 unique cases of classes being limited in order to not be running those classes full time. Because again, if you could have 2 medics, you'd probably be running 2 medics all the time. If you could have 2 demos, you'd probably be running 2 demos all the time. Okay, so let's move on now to, let's do Sniper next. And Sniper for a long time actually was class limit 2. It was kind of the default. And Sniper is honestly pretty arbitrary for class limit 1. Because I don't think class limit of 2 on Sniper changes much at all. I don't think you would see double Sniper that much. But it's more so motivated by the fact that Sniper is a complete and utter... Oh, I'm sorry, KJR. I just got you killed. I think it's more so that Sniper is just a complete and utter pest and nuisance to play against. That the idea of having to play against 2 of them, even like 1% of the time, is just not really worth anything, and you may as well just keep it on 1, honestly. And, you know, I may dream of a world where that class limit 1 hits 0 someday, but I don't think that's gonna happen anytime soon, if ever. But can you imagine? So yeah, that's why Sniper's class limit 1 is, just because it's a complete pest and nuisance, and you don't want to be playing against more than one of them. But unlike medic and demo, these limits are not intended to prevent the class from being played, and in fact, you know, you aren't going to see more snipers just because you have a limit of 2. You would see snipers in the exact same situations you see sniper now, because the way that snipers use now is the way that maximizes sniper strengths while minimizing the weaknesses, right? Because it is a very weak and exploitable class in some sense to be using all the time, which is why players have figured that out like literally over a decade ago. And since then, the meta has only been more and more refined, trying to figure out more and more ways that sniper can be used while also highlighting the places where it might be a little weaker. So anyway, yeah. That's sniper. Now let's talk about engineer and heavy, because those are 2 other examples. And the reason that they are limited to 1 is the same for both. So basically, heavy and engineer are premier defensive classes. They are some of the best defensive utility that a team can have, and on every single last hold you're gonna see an engineer, and if you don't see an engineer, it's because that engineer is on heavy. And if they aren't and there's 2 scouts, then you can be watching a game of competitive with absolutely no experience whatsoever. And if the team defending doesn't have ad and aren't actively trying to push, and you see 2 scouts, you can type away in chat that they're misplaying, because you should always have those extremely strong defensive assets when you're trying to hold last, right? And some people think that even 1 engineer is like bad for the game because of how good it is at defending, right? Which I disagree with completely, of course. But let's give another example, again, similar to the case of Demo, of how the meta exists now and how it would exist with, for example, 2 engineers. So right now, when it is a stalemate on last and you are pressuring last, there's always, or should always be, a sentry gun, right? And this sentry serves many purposes. The first and foremost is it just controls space, right? I mean, TF2 is a game of space, and being able to at least watch some doors so that the other team can't just walk in and take a fight is really useful to have, on top of the fact that it just auto aims for you and is kind of automatic. So it kind of does that for you. Just by having a gun up in a good position, you are automatically much easier. It's much easier to hold your last, which is what you're looking for when you're on last. So that being said, another thing that you're looking for in an even Uber's sentry gun is denial of sacks. So one of the primary ways that a sacking soldier is prevented from killing a medic is by preventing them from landing near your medic, where they can do a lot of damage with their rockets dealing more ramp up damage by being closer. So this is typically performed by scouts just playing high ground, denying the bombs. But the sentry gun just locks onto them and knocks them away, and suddenly you just get to deny pretty much every sack that the gun sees. So a very strong central gun position is oftentimes going to be a... this is an interesting plan for me. So yeah, it is maybe the best sack denying tool that a team has, is a gun on last. So we understand the immense strength of a gun on last and why every team is going to want to use a gun on last, which again is soapbox again, but I'm going to say regardless, again, pointing out that these off classes have immense utility and will get seen like every game, but you're not going to see an engineer on mid. And I'm not sure why you would expect to, or why that is required for the class to have merits and uniqueness and its own place in the metagame. Okay, getting off my soapbox again. Man, I've seen some people commenting about like, you know, the not necessarily ego, but just like talking down. And I maybe I understand it now because I can't help myself. So yeah, immense defensive utility in these sentry guns. However, when it comes to the counterplay, there is definitely definitive counterplay. One such example being you spam a player off of a door because, your typical last hold is going to involve a gun somewhere. Either your other scout is either on scout or sniper typically, or you're going to have, scout or sniper, and you're going to have your soldiers and demos basically coordinating between the spam on the doors because you're just trying to prevent people from being able to walk through doors, preventing them from doing anything into your last because you are just trying to hold your point. Because if you lose your point, you lose the round, and you don't want to lose the round because you lose the game. So, with that in mind, primarily what a team is looking to do into last is get some type of pressure. And in the case of Gully Wash, actually, the pressure into last is fantastic because not only can you get players behind from river into water and potentially pressure the point during your pressure for your sack or whatever, but a lot of the doors can be pressured simultaneously in what teams will call a pressure cook, in order to look for a bunch of different things. One of them being to spam down the gun, one of them being to get damage on the medic, or just damage on a player, or just a pick in general with which you can continue to pressure even harder. It's a very fluid and very dynamic game state that you have to play really heads up to get the most value out of. But during a pressure cook, one of the big things is going to be spam down the gun. And once you spam down the gun, a lot of the time a team will just sack or double sack or something, because now that massive defensive utility is out of the way and your bomb won't get denied. So you're looking at a decent shot of forcing the enemy medic and getting add into last. And, add into last is a decent enough shot at scoring a round. So a lot of, and not even in the case of a Gully Wash pressure cook, but a lot of the pressure into last does involve, or, a primary plan of teams does involve pressuring a door by spamming the guy that was holding it off of the door. So you can at least peek it, at least get a little bit of space. And with that, you spam down the gun. Oftentimes with double soldier spam, because, two soldiers spamming simultaneously cannot get out tanked by an engineer. But honestly, a demo as well is fantastic at taking out sentries. Likewise, with lock and load as well, you can just sticky pipe the gun, which is fantastic. And as a quick aside, if the lock ever does, oh my god, this guy gets another backstab, another 2k on spy. This is ridiculous. And actually, if the lock does get banned in North America, which again, I kind of doubt it does, the one thing I would actually miss about it is the fact that it's so easy to take out buildings. It just makes last pushes so much nicer and smoother. But anyway, the gun is a big pain point for sacking into last, so it is a big pressure point for teams trying to spam into last. Now let's imagine what the game would look like if engineer, you had two of them in an even Uber situation. You would want to have two guns. You would have both scouts play engineer. And again, this would, if anything, restrict a player's options for class selection more than introduce new options, because everyone would just want two engineers on last. You wouldn't see a sniper on last or a pyro on last. You might still see a heavy on last. No, you wouldn't. No, you would have your heavy. Well, you would still see a heavy in last in the cases where you aren't seeing an engineer, but you don't see engineer in any more game states than you already did. You're just going to see two of them in the cases that you already did. And in the case of holding last, suddenly it's just so much more difficult to push into last, because you can't just spam down a gun and then sack, because there's another one. And instead of, basically every gun spot has blind spots. In the case of, Process is a classic example, because a gun spot on the right side of point, for instance, which again, what you're looking for in a gun spot is typically something kind of central that watches a lot of areas. But in the case of the right side point on Process, that can watch 1 and 2, it can watch 3 and 4, but it's spammable from 5. So if teams pressure 5, they can spam that gun without the gun seeing them. However, if you move your gun to the left side of point, then suddenly, oh my god, this is a funny demo. This is from a pug, so it's inherently less serious, but you can even see, like, this is very much off meta stuff that's happening, but people are just having fun anyway. So What was I talking about? Yeah, the gun on the left side of point does watch 5 and everything, but is weaker to spam from 2, and then you can pressure 2. And with 2 sentry guns, this is no longer consideration. You can watch everything with a sentry gun, and it just becomes a much more impossible stalemate to deal with. Makes the game slower, makes the play and counterplay around sacking and playing Ubers way less interesting. Because, you know, a fluid and coordinated and dynamic team is suddenly way less rewarded for their play. And it's overall, in my opinion, and I think in many people's opinions, just worse off having 2 engineers in that situation. And then that's not even to mention disadd on last, where, and let's talk about that first here, because next I'm going to talk about heavy. And basically where you see heavy is disadd on last, right? Either disadd on last or even evens on last. Basically any type of last situation in which you don't have time to build a gun, but you need a strong defensive backbone is where a heavy excels. So when it comes to disadd last, there is some really important balance at play. Looking at your typical disadd last hold, essentially what the defenders are looking for are, they're going to want to have traps on point. They're going to want to have their soldiers alive and healthy. They're obviously going to want everyone to be alive and healthy. Because usually the way that a last hold plays out is the other team will Uber in. They will try and take out a sentry gun if it exists. And they are going to try to obviously get any kills if they can get them. But primarily they're going to want a strong positioning for a post-Uber fight. With which they can heal up. They can, you know, reload their ammo, and then they can commit across to the other side of the last, because you typically want to end on a side. And you're just looking for a solid, not foundation, but just a solid setup through which you can then win the push with a commit with soldier bombs and, you know, just walking at the other team, crunching them with spam and damage and killing them all, and usually pressuring cap in the meantime. So usually what the defending team is looking for is they are looking to prolong cap on the point as long as possible. They are looking to kite away from the Uber so that no one dies to it. And they are also looking to establish strong positioning through which they can not only contest the point, but actually have a foothold of space that they can play off of. Because again, it's a game of space, so you want to have space. So with that in mind, typically you have, you know, your demo trapping point to prolong that as long as possible. Give them something to have to clear, slow them down so they can't just get a ton of cap time. Because if they can cap really quickly, then they just win before your team can even get out of spawn, kiting before the Uber even ends. And you don't want to lose the game before the Uber even ends. So yeah, demo has traps on point. Both soldiers are playing to stay healthy, and they're playing to bomb and prevent players from capping the point. Basically, they exist so that while your team is kiting and while your team can't actually fight and contest because the other team's Ubered and you're in spawn trying to kite around or whatever, and not die to the Uber, while all of this is happening, your soldiers are what's holding down the point and keeping it from being capped and keeping your team in the game. And yeah, so little pain train back cap there. So these are all very, very important. And typically you have a gun that is just meant to waste time in the Uber. Because again, the longer you can waste time, the better it benefits you, because their Uber is going to end. They might get worse positioning if they have to be really slow and take out some gun or something. And the longer the post fight goes on as well, the defenders have the advantage of not only spawning in the fight, basically, because their spawn is right there, versus the attackers who have to roll out from their spawns to get into the fight, but also they have the resupply advantage. The attackers need to either get a health pack, which typically aren't in the lasts, they're typically in like lobbies and whatnot, or they have to get healed from their medic, versus the defenders can just resupply, it's right there, and they're healthy again. So the longer the fight goes on, the more it benefits the defenders, so you are looking to slow things down typically, and just hold off. Yeah, so there, you can already see that there's very much at play when it comes to even just a disadd last hold, and a lot of moving pieces. Now, of course, something like getting a pick immediately changes things in the favor of one team. Because, for example, like if the attackers kill a soldier, suddenly that's one fewer person that can deny the point while the other team's kiting, and cap pressure could be really good. If you kill a demo before or during a last push, it should be a guaranteed win, because you should be able to just immediately cap the point before they can even do anything, because you don't have to worry about sticks. You don't have to slow at all to do that. And all these are just really in the balance, assuming that... Oh man, that was kind of fast. Let's load up some other random demo. That's all just in the balance, assuming that there is... let's do a random process, I guess. This is all in meticulous balance, assuming that there is a single sentry gun and you're only going to have to deal with a single post-sentry heavy, because typically an engineer will switch to heavy, and heavy late into an Uber or in a post-Uber last hold situation basically serves as just a damage check, right? You are a giant meat sponge that does a lot of damage at close and even mid ranges. So you are essentially checking their focus fire. If the other team has ammo loaded and can focus you down during their commit, then you're likely going to die. However, if they are unable to do that, then you're going to get a bunch of kills and you are going to hold. And it's really important that there's kind of only one of those, because you can see all the different moving pieces and all the elements that go into a last hold that both the attackers and the defenders have to do. And there is kind of, there is some elegance in this balance, right? And it allows for individual decisions and individual play to matter a lot. If you get a kill into last as the attacker, let's say you're a soldier and you get a kill, or let's say you're a demo and you catch an engineer in the Uber or something, you can, like, that's very rewarding, because you know that that pick is very much contributing to a win. And while last pushes with ad are generally, you want to be winning rounds, like you feel like you don't want to be failing them, and if you are failing them consistently, then there's an issue. However, they're not guaranteed, and it's not uncommon for these pushes to fail. But because they're typically higher percentage, that also gives you a lot of reward if you successfully hold, because you know that you did something difficult, right? But if we imagine a class limit of 2 on engineer and heavy, no, not like in the case of medic and demo would we ever see more engineers or heavies in situations we don't already see them. We would just see 2 of them in situations where we would normally see 1. So what does that meaningfully change about the format? Basically, the only thing that it would ever change about the format is just make it so that holding last on disad is so much easier, and it's way more difficult to win around. And in even Uber's stalemates, it would be way harder to pressure into last, and it would be so much more difficult to actually break a stalemate into last. So all we're really doing by having 2 of these classes is just making the game more stalematey, getting rid of a lot of the nuance in holding last, and honestly reducing the individual impact of players, and just slowing the game down for, I would argue, not really any benefit, honestly. Like, because again, a lot of the people who think that these class limits exist to uphold the meta or something, or to prevent people from playing these classes in other situations, certainly not the case. Like, the reason why people play engineer on last and not anywhere else is because engineer is better than a scout on last, but not better than a scout anywhere else, pretty much, right? Likewise, the reason you see a heavy on last and not a heavy anywhere else is because heavy is better than a scout on last, and heavy is not better than a scout or a soldier in other situations. That being said, I should correct myself that you do see heavy pushes into last, but of course it's very timing dependent, because heavy is such a slow class, you need to roll out. But absolutely something you do see, and not just some like I suppose you could call it off meta, but it's a legitimate strategy that serious competitors will use seriously, because heavy, of course, does do a lot of damage and can be kind of that late fight damage coordination. Focus fire is the word I'm looking for. That late fight focus fire check, and that can be a valuable asset for an attacking team, not just a defending team. So into last, sometimes you see heavy, but these class limits, like the reason that you're not seeing heavy being run elsewhere is because this class is weaker in those situations. Same applies to these other off classes, right? Like the reason that you don't see that you might see Pyro on last, in a disad situation playing to Air Blast, but you won't see Pyro elsewhere, is more so because Pyro has very glaring weaknesses as far as mobility and range goes, and you're not going to... oh, I got another Steam notification. I should be muting these while I'm recording. Sorry for the troll again. But yeah. So hopefully this just kind of elucidated why these class limits exist. It's different reasons for different classes, but they, to be clear, don't exist to limit the range or use of these classes. If anything, it's just to make the metagame more fun and balanced in the situations that you see these classes, by preventing them from just being stacked needlessly in those cases. Because again, if you allow 2 engineers, 3 engineers, whatever, you aren't going to be seeing engineers anywhere else other than last anyway, because again, we figured out like over years and years that this is where engineer excels, and these situations are where engineer falls off. And that's just how the game is designed, unfortunately. Now, of course, in a less serious setting, you can play any class at any time whenever you want, and it really doesn't matter as long as you're having fun. But if you're trying to win and trying to do the best thing that you can to win, then yeah, this is stuff that's been figured out. Letting people play 2 engineers doesn't change that. It's still going to be better on last and worse elsewhere. You're just going to see 2 of them on last, so it's just a matter of asking yourself the question, is it worth letting this happen? Would we rather play with 1 engineer on last or 2? Because it's really one or the other. Teams are going to play with as many engineers as they can. And I think that I've made the case, at least, that yes, it is more fun and more interesting, and players have more options, as well as a stronger balance between defense and offense when there's only one, right? So yeah, hopefully this was just useful context for why these class limits exist. And yeah, hopefully it was entertaining as well. So yeah, I will see you guys next time. And next time is going to be actually like some informative stuff, not really talking so much about the whitelist and Six's metagame maintenance and whatnot that does admittedly do numbers. It gets a lot of people fired up, but yeah, I'll see you guys next time.